country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country.
It appears as though something has happened in the motorcade route. Something, I repeat, has happened in the motorcade route.
Dallas, Texas, the flash, apparently official, President Kennedy died at 1 p.m. Central Standard Time.
My brother need not be idealized or enlarged in death beyond what he was in life. To be remembered simply as a good and decent man who saw wrong and tried to right it, saw suffering and tried to heal it, saw war and tried to stop it.
How about now? Can you hear me now? I know there's a delay. Man, I must have hit another button. First button of the night. I'm sorry, guys. You might as well just put your seatbelts on, put your tray tables up, put your chairs in the upright position. It's going to be a bumpy ride tonight because we're telling the truth as best as I can unravel it. So I'll start again. Kennedy, he was trying to do some of the right things, I believe. 5 by 5 now. Thank you. So you can say what you want about the man. Every time I start these, I start out with a little bit about, I know who he was. I never liked the fact that he was a womanizer and he's cheating on his wife. And I know for a fact, one of her children, I believe it was John. And I think there were other complications too, but I don't want to guess on that. I'm a little foggy there in the details on that one, but he was not there for one of them. She was by herself. The nurses and stuff, but I can't imagine trying to get away with that nowadays. Who would want that? Who would put up with that? Who would think to do that? And he was off, carousing. Also, you go back to my conversations with Mark Shaw, a wonderful author and legal analyst, terrific mind. And he wrote a book called Poison Patriarch. And that started with Joe, the father, Joe Kennedy, and how he lived his life and what his wife put up with and the things he was into, bootlegging and gambling and so many other things. It was the times, but I think that's an easy out to say, it was the culture, it was the times. Again, it's so hard to imagine and put yourself in those times because it seemed like the veneer was so polished. The people in suits and, and nice manners and ties and money and women in nice dresses and, hats and shoes and purses that matched and wearing, high heels while you cook dinner for 5 and, the kitchen floor is spotless, that kind of stuff. Behind the scenes, believe me, they're just as dirty and dingy as we are. No matter what a decade you dig into, we find this on the show over and over again. I don't care if it's 100 years ago, 500 years ago, people were people. So there's no excuse saying it's the times, it's what they were used to. It's just it's wrong. It's immoral. It's not something we would want to put up a person and say, look, this guy is, is squeaky clean across the board. That you cannot say that about the Kennedys. You can't. But here's the thing: she knew what she was getting into. Her family was the same. Joe Kennedy was the one who ran this family, and the things that happened with Rose Kennedy and so many other things. The stories are just endless. We've all heard them, from Chappaquiddick to, have you ever? This family. So if you're talking about the type of person that John Kennedy was, it just doesn't matter what you bring up. When it comes to when the chips were down, he turned down Project Northwoods. He didn't want to do some of the the things that the generals were saying that they should do, that they had already cleared, such as shooting down a commercial airliner and blaming it on the Cubans. Just so many things. I believe that he was lied to by a lot of his staff, certainly the military complex, certainly factions of the government that are rather rogue and still are. I mean, this is common knowledge, or it should be. If it's not common knowledge at this point, what have you been thinking over these past few decades? Do you see what I'm saying? So I don't think any of that is in dispute. Because then we can bring up, the hero PT-109 and the things that he did there. I mean, the man definitely has some character. But then, Marilyn Monroe, and did he really pass her off to Bobby? What was going on there? What did Marilyn get into? What did she know she was getting into? What was she into? I mean, again, every single aspect of this case, every single person, every direction, every door you take leads you to wild things. So no matter really what you can say about Kennedy and who was mad at him, the oil companies, the CIA for busting it into 1,000 pieces and throwing it to the wind, getting rid of Dulles and his two heads right after. He basically knocked the head off of CIA. Well, what did Allen Dulles do? He walked across the street, basically down the block, walked into another building and continued doing what he was doing. But now he's angry. And his brother Foster, same. You have all these other connections. You have the Connollys, you have the Murchisons, you have all the people in Dallas. But again, back up. Because you also had the attempts on his life in Miami and the attempt on his life in Chicago. And I've just heard last week of another one from Brad Metzler. He just wrote a book about it. There was some guy after him had a carload of explosives that nobody ever hears about. So again, whatever you can say about him, he didn't deserve this. He didn't deserve to have his head blown off at 12:30 in the afternoon in Dallas, Texas. And who conspired to make that happen? That's what we're trying to unravel. If you weren't here last week, the reason I explain it as a tapestry, real quick, I'll explain it. I think most people they have their patchwork quilt, and they've tried to create a quilt over this entire thing. And they have their patch, however big that may be, whatever pattern that may be, whatever colors that may be, how many patches they may have, and they put them together, and then they have others. And it just seems like, and then somebody else will come in and they'll bring their patches and they'll probably put it in this quilt. And then they argue because their patches don't match. And it's everything is separate and compartmentalized, it seems. Whereas with the tapestry, you have threads, and every thread is important. And even if you have a broken thread, you can see where it's leading. You just have to fill the gap if you can. Because in this over 62 years, we have so many gaps, but they're slowly being filled. The JFK files, some of them have been released. A lot of those that have been released we've had before, but now they're redacted. They're not unredacted, excuse me. And there's information coming out. And I think that's going to help us with the threads and with the picture and filling in. Do I believe, and again, who am I? Everything here is just decades of looking into this, keeping my eyes and ears open, just like a lot of people here, reading a lot of books, talking to a lot of people, the same, We all have theories, but I've always tried to look at it the way I look at the paranormal, like a good ghost story, good mystery. Back up and don't throw anything out because you don't know what's going to be important. And try not to focus on one thing and make the pieces fit. See where the facts lead you. And as I said last weekend, one of the places it leads me, one of the major doors in my dark little hallway that leads me down this mysterious walk here to trying to point the finger at least in the right directions, the JFK murder, because that's what it was. It was also a coup. We can't allow that to happen. 60 years, I don't care. There is no statute of limitations on murder or treason. Now, I'm just me, and I'm saying these things because this is what I believe in my heart. This is what I've come up with, along with multiple other people, based on a lot of documents, authors' hard work, researchers' hard, tireless work. And I've named many of them in the description and in the video there. Now, not everybody in that category all agrees on one thing, except that Oswald didn't do it alone. And I think that that's because they're making a quilt when they should be putting together a tapestry. Keep all the threads. Let's see what the picture shows us. And that's what I'm trying to do. So last week I showed you a clip from, I believe it's The Men Who Killed Kennedy. I think it was 80s, early 90s when it came out. Very good. And something a little bit earlier, a little closer to the Kennedy shooting, around 75. We talked about trying to read some of the early books, the early witness statements, anything you could get your hands on that were close to, because everything got changed. Even Mark Lane's first edition is different than the second printing because they made him change it. They made him take parts out. So let's see what y'all are saying here in the chat. Where are you guys now? Is everybody pretty much, did anything you heard last weekend switch the direction that you're kind of putting your focus on? Hello, Woo. Good to see you. Wish you'd come in here and talk to me about this. I bet you know some off the top of your head. I bet you know more than you think you do. Hey, Jim. Welcome, welcome. Welcome to anybody I missed. So the reason I did that, like I said, is because stuff gets changed. And I think, there's some real garbage out there, and that's on purpose. If you don't know that these agencies put out stuff to sway you in propaganda and wonderfully produced movies and magazines and art and you name it, just to get your attention someplace else or to focus on this and look here, not there. There was a lot of that going on with this. This is the grand master of conspiracy facts. November 22nd, 1963. So we talked also last week about our new FBI director, about a year ago, I guess it was, when he was on, I think it was Glenn Beck. Say what you want about Glenn Beck. Glenn Beck gives good whiteboard. He definitely gives good whiteboard. he does some stuff on money laundering, and it just wow, it was very very well done. And he doesn't disappoint here either with connecting all the it's fun to watch. But Kash Patel was on there, and they were talking about the fact that Kash Patel had seen a lot of the unredacted documents that were on JFK and others. And he said, and I paraphrase now because I showed it last week, that what most people are looking for and expecting is we already have most of it. We wouldn't believe or be able to fathom what may be in there. But the thing is about it is that it's still going on. And I just saw something today that confirmed that. Tucker had a guest on that was talking about 9/11 and brought in some other things and a little bit about JFK and files and things that he had been through. And he pretty much agreed with Kash. And if we get time, I'll show you a little clip of that. But here's the thing. It's important. And just like Jim Marrs said, it's important to know because they're trying to snowball you with this museum on the 6th floor book depository museum, moving the boxes around, the magic bullet, Oswald, everything about Oswald. Not telling you the other patsies that they had around just in case they needed them, sacrifice them too. They don't tell you about the Miami attempts. JFK was so thrilled. I think it was like 100 and something police officers and Secret Service, and he stayed later just to shake all their hands and thank them personally for the work they had done to thwart him getting killed. The thing a lot of people don't know is he had already been to Texas. Earlier, I think it was April, he had already been to Texas and he figured, okay, campaign in there. We don't want to waste the money to go back again. And, we don't need to go to Texas because there was somebody trying to convince him to go. And that was his vice president, Lyndon Baines Johnson. And Kennedy kept turning it down. So we don't need to go. I don't know why I realize it's your state. And, we've pretty much got that because you're on the ticket and, why. Well, there was an argument very close to, I want to say October-ish, end of October, and 63. And it was LBJ, Lyndon Baines Johnson, the vice president at the time, talking to Kennedy in the Oval Office. And Connolly was with him, Governor Connolly, governor of Texas. And they were having a heated debate about whether or not Kennedy should go to Dallas. And witnesses to that, I believe, and even Jackie Kennedy remarked on it, and I'm pretty sure Lincoln, Kennedy's secretary, had said something about it too, I believe, that it was the most heated argument, the most ruckus and language that came out of that office that they had ever heard. And Kennedy backed down. He said, okay, I'll go. And if you ask the people that were around Connolly and LBJ after Kennedy said he would go, there was a definite difference in how they were acting. So again, some of this is speculation, some of this is witness statement, but eventually, if the witness statements are not thrown out by some other thing that proved that it couldn't be, it's just like any other case. But I guess it really is kind of a cold case that it shouldn't be. We need the answers. We need to find out what happened. We need to understand how it happened so it can never happen again. Plain and simple. So I'm going to reach back. We're going to play a little of this. Again, last week, I was leaning towards that. LBJ is a big door in this hallway. And this door, we're not shutting. This door I'm going to leave open. And we'll go down the hall, the hall, and explore behind the other doors and see what fits and what's different. And, you throw out your ideas and your theories, and we'll see if we can unravel this together. But right now, I'm fine sitting with LBJ, Governor Connolly, and others that LBJ knew in Dallas, because he had a lot of connections, and they were all scared of him. And from what I'm understanding from people much wiser than I am in this, are saying if you ask people in Dallas right after the shooting, who do you think was involved? There's no doubt in their mind. LBJ had something to do with it. Now, there's hardcore researchers in the JFK assassination list that they won't go there. They'll say he had something to do with the cover-up, but they can't quite go into he had something to do with it. I'm going to show you some things. You be the judge. Now, if you can crawl where we were last week, we had some pretty good information. We heard from Madeline Brown, LBJ's longtime mistress, like over 25 years. I believe that she had his son. Although he denied it in court, he sent her checks. So, again, you be the judge. And he looked just like him. Right after was cash. Right after JFK was shot, here is some remarks from LBJ, and I'm going to show you a couple of different faces of LBJ to go along with what we've already learned. We'll have sound in just a minute. This is an old newsreel. This is them arriving off the plane. It's LBJ and probably Lady Bird. So I used to get on planes, guys.
This is a sad time for all people. We have suffered a loss that cannot be weighed. For me, it is a deep personal tragedy. I know that the world shares the sorrow that Mrs. Kennedy and her family bear. I will do my best. That is all I can do. I ask for your help and God's.
Let's go back to the night before when Johnson came out of the meeting. What did he say to you?
He was so angry. He had a violent temper when he was upset.
Well, let's use the exact words that he said to you. What did he say to you?
He grabbed me by the arm and he had this deep voice, and he said, "After tomorrow, those SOBs will never embarrass me again. That's no threat. That's a promise." And it startled me, really, because he was so ruddy-faced. And I thought, oh, well, he really, something went on that shouldn't have gone on. But he called me from the Texas hotel the next morning as I was going downtown.
Right.
And hear this screaming voice of his. He was so irate. And he didn't give me time to talk to him. He just... he was still angry. And when I talked to Jess Kellum right after that.
Can you guys hear this? Does it work now?
No.
It's not working. You can't hear the sound. Can you hear when I'm talking?
No.
You can't even hear me when I'm talking. Now you can hear me. Works now. I didn't hit any buttons, I swear. Okay, can you hear the YouTube video, chat? I'll play it again. You guys let me know in the chat if you can hear it. Because sometimes I have to hit the settings on the YouTube.
And I said, wow, he's on a real violent binge, And then I passed it off. I said, well, after tonight at the Driscoll, he'll be all right.
Yeah.
And, of course, I didn't see him again until...
What were the words he said to you over the phone?
That they would never embarrass him again. But SOB, the Irish Mafia, I think, he referred to him as the Irish Mafia very often.
But he said they would never embarrass him again.
I'd never embarrass him again. There was no threat. That was a promise.
Okay. So there you hear it again. And this is about 20 years after. Now, she did write a book. I forget the name of it. And one of the senators that read it, that gave his information on this case, said it was one of the dirtiest books he'd ever read in his entire life. I can imagine, because LBJ was something else. And I'm sure she, who knows. But he comes out of that meeting, grabs her, and when she described it before, he very forceful, like he was excited, but wanted to share it with her, and just grabbed her by the shoulders and looked at her and said, after tomorrow, that Irish Mafia or those Kennedy boys, I think he said the night before, I'll never have to worry about them again. That's not a threat, it's a promise. The next day, he calls on the phone and he says the Irish Mafia. Now, the Irish Mafia is what he used to call all the Kennedy clan, because of Joe, the poison patriarch, as Mark Shaw said. As I said earlier, and I can't remember if my mic was working then or not, but he was into bootlegging and gambling, you name it, he was in it, and he wanted his boys to be president and pushed them. He wanted the older boy, Joe, Jr., but he died in the war. He was shot down. So it leaned on John F. Kennedy. So here we are. LBJ's at this big meeting with Herbert Hoover. We heard some people, witnesses, the limo driver who Hoover did not give a tip after he was taken out of there. We heard it from one of the maids for the Murchisons that they celebrated all week with caviar and champagne. There was a lot of people that wanted Kennedy dead. There was a lot of people that did not want their lifestyle changed. They were corrupt. They were making money hand over fist on things like war, drugs, you name it, and blackmail and oil and all the things. And they didn't want that to stop. And Kennedy was kind of trying to put the kibosh on a lot of it, especially the Vietnam War. He wanted troops to come back. He was lied to about that. And the day, I think I think Kennedy was still lying in the Capitol Tundra in his coffin when LBJ took Kennedy's basically idea for what he, getting everybody back from Vietnam and really slowing that down and pulling it back, and changed 2 paragraphs in it to "we will be putting ground troops in," and escalating. And he was still lying in state. So all the things that I could tell you about LBJ, his reactions right after, I've heard in several books, multiple different researchers say that he even already, while he was on the plane, Jackie Kennedy, still in her blood-soaked pink little outfit, standing next to him, he had a copy of the swearing-in ceremony for a vice president to be sworn in. It's not even necessary from what I understand, because it's automatic. If something happens to the president, you don't have to be sworn in. But he made such a big deal out of it. He had to have a certain woman judge that they waited almost like 2 hours and 15 minutes for to do the ceremony. And one of the first things he did, with a copy of it in his jacket, he called the Attorney General, who happened to be Bobby Kennedy, the brother, and asked him to send him a copy of that, just so he could twist that knife a little bit. This is the character of LBJ. When Jackie Kennedy got back on Air Force One on the plane, because this is what they had now. They were there in Dallas. This is what they flew in on. So she's going back on the plane. She goes into the bedroom of, where the president could sleep. And who's laying on the bed but LBJ with his shirt off and his hands behind his head? Shocked her. Absolutely shocked her. I mean, I can't imagine what that woman went through. And after everything, she took off and she left. And LBJ called her. Here's that phone call. You tell me if this sounds like a rational thing for a then sitting president to call the widow of the president that got shot in Dallas. This is just weeks after. Let me see if I can pull it up. I think this is it. You tell me what you hear in his voice.
Hello?
Hello?
Jackie?
Mr. President?
I love you.
Aren't you sweet? Where are you?
You just skipped away from this town. I ought to have had you arrested.
But I was so mad at myself.
Yeah, well, you ought to be mad. You almost made me mad at you, leaving without coming by and hugging me and telling me goodbye.
Yeah, but did you get my note?
Yes, I did. Then I
talked to ladies, but I felt so stupid.
Well, I miss you, and I'm thinking of you, and I know your Christmas won't be what it ought to be, but I wish that I could make it happier. When I got ready to go to home for my Christmas, the Congress just said they'd spank me and hit me right in the face and wouldn't let me go, and that's the way I want to do you next time if you don't tell me goodbye.
Oh, listen, as soon as you get back, I'll come and get a vitamin B shot from Dr. Trevell.
Won't you do that? Won't you do that?
Yeah.
Thank you, honey.
Yeah.
Bye. Hello?
How's that sound to y'all? He wants to spank her? Ought to had arrested because she ran off and didn't give him. Doesn't that just make you ill? Doesn't it? So that's, if you know the context of this call, this isn't the only call. There's multiple. And there's lots of transcripts of them as well. But he harassed her all the time. And he scared her to death. And she was quoted several times as saying that she thought LBJ had something to do with it. Incredible stuff. I mean, it's just so sickening if you knew how bad he was. He used to, I think I said this last weekend, but you know, it's worth repeating. If you were a guest on his ranch in Texas, or if you were a guest at the White House and you brought your wife with you and you stayed over, he put you in separate rooms for a reason. More than one woman has written and told the stories, much to their horror, of getting woke up, the covers thrown back, and said, "Move over. This is your president." He would chase secretaries around in the room, rape them. If you came to work for him or you were a journalist and you wanted to do a story or something like that, he'd buy you a bathing suit and make you try it on. He was an absolute pig. He used to run around the White House. He could drink a lot of Cuddy Sark. And they say that he could put down quite a bit and still not really show the effects of it, maybe a little slur here and there. But he would run around the White House naked, or with his Johnson out that he called his cash and prices, he called Jumbo, and make everybody else size up with him and make all the men that worked for him feel, inferior or just embarrass them. He used to sit on the toilet in the morning and have his cabinet in the room with him like an old king, and give out the daily list of what he would have them do just to show control. He would use them as footstools. He loved to belittle people the way he was. Now, his neighbor, longtime good friend, was the head of the FBI, Herbert Hoover. And I'm going to show you a little story of how LBJ got picked as the VP. Now, there's several people I could send you to in direction if you want to know more about this story. I would absolutely recommend Jim Marrs. I would recommend Rodger Stone's book. There's a lot of good information in there. You have to be very careful because if you don't know, in order to get a book published again, or a new book published on a subject that has been written about before, especially one as much as JFK, in order to get it published, you have to have something new in it. So a lot of times somebody will write a book and have a lot of the information that's already out there, and then boom, something new, a new twist, a new curve, or a new something. And that's the only way you can get it published. So a lot of books, they'll follow all the way through, and then something new, like I said, but that might be made up out of whole cloth. Then you have to research that. And this is why this case makes people so crazy. So this one, let's see. Got so many tabs open. Let's go with a little bit. We ready for that one yet? We'll wait on that one. Let's do this one. Let's go back to the day with everything we know about LBJ, the party the night before. We know the oil companies are mad. We know the people that want to make money in the war, have anything to do with Vietnam on both sides. We know the CIA, the Dulles brothers. We know that LBJ knew so many people. He was very good friends with the owner of the school book depository, for Pete's sake. And something you all might know too is that it was I think the motorcade was supposed to go through another route. Had something to do with a big open air kind of farmer's market-y kind of thing. Forget the name of it, but it got changed because they needed it to go past this school book depository. There were so many windows open, which again is against Secret Service and so many other. It shouldn't have been open, and Secret Service should have been on the limousine and all that. And they asked whose idea was it to take the dome off the car that day when Kennedy had asked for it earlier, and that was protocol. And usually what happens in these situations is they'll always blame it on somebody that can't refute it, like the dead guy. So in this case, Secret Service said, well, Kennedy's. He wanted to be able to see the people. He wanted the people to see him. So it would always be that blame it on the person that can't, refute it. So let's go back to the day. We'll watch a little bit about this, and then we'll come back and talk about that. And I've got some more stuff for you here, too. If I can get it to play right. This is from that same series, The Men Who Killed Kennedy.
Striking the president from behind as he rode in a motor. Arlington National Cemetery, Washington, and the final resting place of one of America's greatest heroes. Each year, 3.5 million people pay homage at this shrine to the memory of President John F. Kennedy. They also come to ponder one of the greatest murder mysteries of all time.
There was a monstrous cover-up of everything. I know it, and so do the people who covered it up.
It angers me terribly that we don't know the truth. And the arrogance of those in power that continue the cover-up and the lie is beyond tolerance.
We're not a free country anymore because the people who are smart enough and powerful enough to take out a president like that and get away with it for 25 years are probably involved in other areas of the government. In other words, the country is being run by people we did not vote for.
If it could be done to John F. Kennedy in 1963, it could be done to another president in the future. And we can't afford to have coup d'etats in America, no matter how cleverly orchestrated and sinisterly contrived they may be. That cannot be permitted to happen. And the way in which you prevent that from happening is to expose those elements of government and society in this country that were responsible for the killing of John F. Kennedy.
That's why we're here,
the
honey.
southeast corner window of the 6th floor of the Texas School Book Depository, Dallas. According to the official verdict, the spot where a lone gunman, Lee Harvey Oswald, fired 3 shots into Dealey Plaza, striking the president from behind as he rode in a motorcade down the center of Elm Street. And each year on November the 22nd, an informal gathering on the grassy knoll of people skeptical of their government's conclusion.
Memory and in honor of the events that took place here in November 1963. One moment, please.
Until now, the world has been asked to accept the Warren Commission's verdict on the death of John F. Kennedy. New evidence that exposes the complex and sinister forces that brutally murdered the President of the United States 25 years ago will be shown here for the first time. President Kennedy's last day began at a Chamber of Commerce breakfast in Fort Worth. In his entourage were Vice President Lyndon Johnson and the Governor of Texas, John Connally.
And the son of a bitches knew it the whole time.
His purpose for his visit to Texas, it was not just about
Son of a bitch.
was to raise money for himself and for the Democratic Party, and also to enhance his standing, because he was looking forward to the election in 1964.
We couldn't let you leave Fort Worth without providing you with some protection against the rain.
He didn't put it on.
I'll put it on in the White House on Monday. If you'll come up there, you'll have a chance to see it there.
His second engagement of the day was a luncheon in Dallas, a 6-minute flight away on Air Force One.
And now the Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord lift up his countenance upon you and be gracious unto you. The Lord cause his face to shine upon you and give you peace both now and forever. Amen.
From the dark, overcast, the drizzling rain of Fort Worth to the bright sunshine when we landed at Love Field in Dallas, it promised to be a an absolutely spectacular day for the president, for the vice president, for me. I was governor of the state. Ms. Connolly and I rode in the car with President and Mrs. Kennedy. He got a very, very warm reception. The schools had turned out. The school children were lining the street by the thousands. They were applauding, and it was a very happy, joyful occasion, really.
2 cars back from the presidential limousine was Senator Ralph Yarborough with Lyndon and Lady Bird Johnson.
As we approached the city and then finally turned down Main Street toward the Trinity River, the crowd increased as we got to the heart of Dallas. And it's one of the most enthusiastic crowds I saw in any city we were in Texas on that tour. That's on the sidewalks. Now, if you looked up in the upper stories, I never saw a single smile at any window I looked at. Some looked down and looked like with dislike on the faces.
Nellie turned to the president and said, Mr. President, you can't say now that they don't love you here in Dallas. And within a matter of a few seconds after that, we turned on Elm Street to go down to get on the Stemmons Freeway to go out to the Trade Mart where the luncheon was being held. And that's when the shots occurred. I heard what I thought was a rifle shot. I immediately reacted by turning to look over my right shoulder because that's where the sound came from. I didn't see anything out of the ordinary and was in the process of turning to look over my left shoulder when I felt a blow in the middle of my back, as if someone had hit me with a doubled up fist, about like that. The blow was of such force that it bent me over, and I immediately saw that I was covered with blood. And I knew I'd been hit. And I said, oh my God, they're going to kill us all. And I heard another shot that was a loud shot almost like that. And immediately I saw blood and brain tissue all over the back of the limousine.
What does that tell you, folks? Just that much. Now, this is Connolly, as you know. And if he was in that meeting with LBJ, the FBI director, Herbert Hoover, who I hear was described as a vacuum a few times, but that was his secret. And he was all about telling everybody else's secret. And Froze, you are right. He was a ditty of his time. So was Hugh Hefner and so many others. Folks, we have been so infiltrated by this, Mike Benz calls it the blob. I call it the tentacles of the poison octopus. It's just into everything. And there's this big undulating head in the center of greed and money and just nasty people that just don't care. These psychopaths that are just high on power and control. I don't even think it's the money anymore. So your mileage may vary, but I look at this man and I think he was at that meeting. He knew what was going on. I mean, how could you not at this point? Why did LBJ, the first thing he says when he comes through those doors, I don't think Madeline Brown was standing right outside of the door, just like a puppy waiting for him to come out. But, I wasn't there. I think she was probably sitting on the couch chatting. The doors open up. People start milling out. They stand up and straighten out their skirt and want to look good, see who's coming out. He makes a beeline for her, grabs her by the shoulders and tells her what she stated. After tonight, I'll never have to worry about those Kennedy boys again. Those goddamn Kennedy boys. That was the first thing he said. Obviously, almost high off of talking about it in the room. This man was in there. Oh my God, they're going to shoot everybody? They're going to kill us all? This is the man that supposedly got hit with the magic bullet. The Warren Commission signed. That Gerald Ford was on. Changed the autopsy picture. You'll hear about that. Every time I say that, somebody goes, "What? Really?" And I'm like, "Yeah, man. Really happy." He admitted it more than once on video. Gerald Ford. Then he became president. Isn't that odd how that works? So I look at this man and I take everything he says with a grain of salt, because I also remember that he was the one that was in the Oval Office convincing Kennedy like their lives depended on it, with LBJ, to go to Dallas for this very reason. It wasn't for the votes. They had it. They had Texas. I don't know. I just it's human beings can be very evil.
I knew then that the president had been fatally hit, because Miss Kennedy then, I heard her say, "My God, I've got his brains in my hand."
The Secret Service in the car in front of us kind of casually looked around, looked up at the back of them, and rather slow to react. And we went under the underpass, and as we came up on the other side, I could see then the president's car, and there was Hill, whom I knew as a Secret Service man assigned to protect Mrs. Kennedy. He was lying across the back to hang on with arm over in there so he could hang on at that high speed. His face turned back towards us, just writhed in agony and beating with his hand on there like a terrible thing has happened. I knew then that Kennedy had been shot.
And what does that tell you? If the debris from the head, the material, the brain matter, the bone, is blown back onto the back of the vehicle, doesn't take a wound expert or a ballistic expert. If you've ever shot a weapon, it signifies a shot from the front. And from what I understand, the actual angle, the best facts on it, is that it was almost ground level. And Jim Mars has a theory on that. Very interesting. We'll bring it up later on down the line. But this is, they're telling you, and you're seeing, even if this is chopped up and cut and edited and there's some frames missing, and they're trying very hard to sell the propaganda they've been told to sell, or they themselves have come up with, or believe it to be, because somebody they trusted told them. It's so compartmentalized. It's insane. So you have to look at the whole thing like this. But they're telling you without, they say in the quiet part out loud, his brains were blown over the back of the limousine. And you're supposed to believe that that shot came from the 6th floor school book depository with a man-liquored Carcano held by Lee Harvey Oswald, who had the paraffin test on his face. If he had made those 3 shots, would have come up positive. It was negative. There's no way that it's going to blow back. Shoot a watermelon. Tell me what you think.
And within several minutes, we came to Parkland Hospital, and the Secret Service immediately jumped out the minute Johnson was there. They practically pulled him out and formed a cordon around him, 4 or 5, and one of them said, "Mr. President." I knew then Kennedy was dead, and I walked up to the car where Mrs. Kennedy was still there on the back seat, lying there with her head bowed over, covering her husband's head, his blood running down her leg and on her clothes, and twice saying, "They've murdered my husband. They've murdered my husband." It's the most tragic sight of my life.
While the senator wept for his president, inside Parkland Hospital, doctors battled to resuscitate him in Trauma Room 1.
My most vivid impression of the entire agitated scene was that his head had been almost destroyed. The face was intact but very swollen, and it was obvious that he had had a massive wound to his head.
We decided that the president was dead, And Dr. Clark, the chairman of neurosurgery, had come in the meantime, and he had walked up to the head of the patient and looked inside at the wound and shook his head.
John F. Kennedy died at approximately 1 o'clock Central Standard Time today here in Dallas. He died of a gunshot wound in the brain. Dr. Berkeley told me it's a simple matter, Tom, of a bullet right through the head.
On duty at Parkland throughout these events was Aubrey Reich, an ambulance driver for the O'Neill Funeral Home. He was approached by the Secret Service.
They told us to go into the trauma room and prepare the president to be moved. And had his head wrapped in sheets. I was, at the time, didn't know where he had been shot or what, and we was all very sad, everybody's choking back tears.
But Dr. Earl Rose was a forensic pathologist, well trained in medical legal autopsies, and he appeared at Trauma 1 and said, this is a homicide in Dallas County, and I will do the autopsy on President Kennedy. In the meantime, a casket had been acquired, and the president's body had been placed in it, and he was informed by the Secret Service that if he didn't get out of the way, he would be run over by the casket as they were leaving. This was the President of the United States, and they were taking him back to Washington.
There was a lot of cursing going on. I was embarrassed, especially for Miss Kennedy, because she was standing right behind us. The priest was there. A lot of what I thought was too foul of language to be going on. It was a terrifying type thing. It's hard to believe, that grown people could be so childish about things and everyone trying to take over.
Vice President Johnson had already left for the airport, shortly to be followed by Jackie Kennedy with her husband's body. The casket was manhandled up the steps of Air Force One. Minutes later, Johnson was sworn in as the new president. Barely 3 hours after arriving in Dallas, the plane left for Washington.
Now, remember what I told you, and you see that picture of him standing there. Let me see if I can get it back up. Oh, gosh, I'm getting that picture. Right. Johnson.
The president's body had been placed in it, and he was informed by the Secret Service that if he didn't get out of the way, he would be run over by the casket as they were leaving. This was the President of the United States, and they were taking him back to Washington.
There was a lot of cursing going on. I was embarrassed, especially for Miss Kennedy, because she was standing right behind us. The priest was there. A lot of what I thought was too foul of language to be going on. It was a terrifying type thing. It's hard to believe, that grown people could be so childish about things and everyone trying to take over.
Vice President Johnson had already left for the airport, shortly to be followed by Jackie Kennedy with her husband's body. The casket was manhandled up the steps of Air Force One.
There it goes.
Minutes later, Johnson...
Right there. Okay. So that's a lot to unpack. I'll see how fast I can do it. First of all, the Secret Service is wrestling the body away from the Dallas Police Department and the doctors there at the Parkland. That's what that big cast is. There's no way they're letting them continue to keep this body. The autopsy is going to be done back in Washington. You heard that LBJ has already gone back to the plane, soon to be followed by Mrs. Kennedy. So you understand she just left that chaos. She's still covered, as you see her standing here, it's black and white, but she's wearing the pink suit. She was asked, do you want to change? She said, no, let them see what they have done. I want them to see what they have done. So here she is in absolute shock and horror. Why he makes her stand next to him is just another one of those control things. This is the man that used his cabinet members and journalists as footstools. Okay, keep this in mind. You see the man in the bow tie. Right after he takes the oath, he turns to this man. I forget his name. I don't want to get it wrong, so I'm just not going to say it. And the man winks at him. The whole time he has got a copy of this oath in his pocket in case the judge needed it, and still called Bobby to get a copy of it, to get it quoted to him, and made Bobby read it to him over the phone. This man is a monster. This is my opinion based on fact, based on what I have learned. I hope you will research it too, so you can come up with your own thoughts on it and your own theories. But in my opinion, at this moment in time, an absolute monster. What the narrator said was soon to be followed by Mrs. Kennedy. When she went up on that plane and went in that bedroom to finally take off this outfit this day and probably get a shower and try to get herself together and maybe a private cry, she hasn't had a moment alone. She opens the door and sees this man laying on her bed with no shirt on, hands behind his head and his feet crossed. And the conversation, I don't want to know what the conversation was that they had. But you can read about it. You can research about it. And that ought to tell you a little bit about the character of this person we're dealing with. Things you don't know, things you don't get to hear about. It's insane. There's so many things about the body, the brain, the loss of it, so many other things that went on during the autopsy. You'll hear about that coming up. But I had to stop it and tell you about that, because when you start building the real LBJ and the people that were around him, it starts to make those threads a little bit brighter, stand out in that tapestry. Not the only ones, but definitely a prominent one, in my opinion.
Was sworn in as the new president. Barely 3 hours after arriving in Dallas, the plane left for Washington. In Dealey Plaza, in the chaos immediately after the shooting, there'd been confusion about where the shots had come from. Over 50 known eyewitnesses believed that there was a gunman up on the grassy knoll, but the police quickly focused their attention on the book depository. The police were in the building within 90 seconds. In the southeast corner of the 6th floor, 3 spent cartridges were found lying closely together against the wall, near a half-open window that overlooked the motorcade route. Later, a rifle was found on the same floor by Deputy Sheriff Eugene Boone.
In the far corner of the stairwell, you could not see this corner of the building at all from the stairwell. That's where I found the rifle, over in the northwest corner of the building. There were 2 rows of books. The outside row was 2 cases high, and as I looked in the crevice, I saw the rifle in there.
It was an Italian Manica Caccano of World War II vintage, worn and rusty and with a misaligned scope. Despite intense efforts over a 3-day period, the Dallas police and the FBI were only able to find Oswald's smudged palm print on the rifle after his death.
All that is disputed, by the way.
45 minutes after the assassination, a police patrolman, J.D. Tippett, was shot dead in the Oak Cliff area of Dallas, 3 miles from downtown. Squad cars swiftly converged on the Texas Theater, a mile from the scene of the shooting. A man, behaving suspiciously, had slipped inside without paying and disappeared into the upper balcony. One of the first police officers on the scene was Paul Bentley.
I came down from the balcony and entered the theater from this door right here. Oswald was sitting in this chair, and just as I entered, he jumped up as McDonald came up in front of him, Officer McDonald. He immediately pulled a gun from his waist. As I saw him pull the pistol, I dove over the seats and came down on the side of Oswald, or the suspect, struggling with him. I scraped his forehead with the bottom of this ring. I had some of the skin from his forehead under the ring when I got to the city hall.
I didn't shoot him because at that time other officers had converged, and I was afraid if I did miss, I might hit another officer. And it seemed like 100 years before I could get that gun out of his hand and get it into my belt. And then after I got the pistol away from him, I let my pistol go back into the holster, and then I popped him one upside of his head. The way he acted, you'd think he'd really been arrested for perhaps a traffic ticket, because he never had the usual symptoms of nervousness, like breaking out in a sweat or shaking or anything
That's
like
important.
that. He was just a real cool individual. And,
That's
you'd
important.
never think, just by looking at him, that he was the one that was going to be accused of killing the president and Officer Tippit.
Oswald, the enigmatic ex-Marine who briefly defected to Russia and was working at the book depository on the day of the assassination, claimed he was in the second-floor lunchroom at the time of the shooting. The first to interrogate him was Gus Rose.
I looked up and I saw some officers bringing a man in who was handcuffed. And when I asked them what they had, one of the officers told me that they had the man here who had killed Officer Tippit. And I took the handcuffs off of Oswald and asked him who he was. He refused to tell me, so I searched him. And in his pocket, he had a wallet, and in the wallet was 2 pieces of identification. One card said Lee Oswald, the other said Alex Hydell. When I asked him who that was or which one of these he was, why, he became belligerent and something to the effect, he said, "You're the cop, you figure it out."
Oh, we getting into it now. Okay. So the theater, Officer Tippit, there's so much more to this. So much more. And we will get into it down the line. And it's very difficult not to jump around in this, but I want you to see the way this was put out as of 25 years after the actual shooting, because we've heard multiple people here say, I don't know the exact date this was made, but they've said for after 25 years, we're still doing this. So I'm assuming it's around that time. There is some dispute of what they found on the 6th floor. We pretty much know up to this date now, our time, that a rifle was found and it was identified by a person who sold guns, had a gun and tackle shop or something along those lines there in Dallas. He knew right away that it was a different gun. Now I don't want to freeze up and forget and say the wrong type of gun. I will have that later when we pull up all the slides and everything else down in another episode. But Walter Cronkite described that gun twice for 2 nights on live television as the gun they found, the 6th floor depository. Okay, right there by the way. Actually, we shoved in some boxes. Later, I think it was about 3 days later, that's when they started saying the Mannlicher Carcano, which matched a gun that Oswald supposedly ordered through a catalog for about $19. And it seemed like they were trying to make the rifle that they found match that information. So there's dispute about that. There's dispute about the casings being found did not come from that weapon. There is so much about the bullets that is insane. The bullets are almost their own characters in this whole story. But as far as what was found on that 6th floor, there was 3 casings, and we've seen the picture of them being right there and obvious. And there is a half-eaten chicken lunch or something along those lines. We've talked about the girls on the stairs. We've talked about Oswald being in the 2nd floor, just like he said. The reason I stopped it here was to pretty much emphasize the fact that when Oswald is arrested, whether things went down in the theater the way they're saying or not, whether he actually tried to shoot one of the officers and he couldn't shoot because the gun he had, and it's also a mystery of where he got that gun from, the revolver, had a broken firing pin. So if someone wanted him to have a gun that wouldn't shoot without him knowing about it, like, here, Lee, use this one in case you need it. from somebody he might have trusted that he might have been working with, such as a special unit of a 3-letter agency, which is highly probable at this point because of all the different documents that have come out recently, as well as what we've had over the decades. But Oswald is very complex character, so we'll just touch on that for now. But think about that. He also said, this gentleman, they found something on Oswald when they arrested him. Not only did Oswald seem unmoved, not really fighting. I mean, you know, how can that be true if he actually did try to pull a pistol and shoot somebody, you know, shoot a cop? But you have other people saying he was really unaffected. He acted like maybe we were arresting him for a parking ticket. He wasn't sweating. He wasn't fighting. He was just going along with the flow. Oswald becomes increasingly more agitated as it goes along in the few days that he was there. And it almost seems throughout these little clips that you see him coming through and being moved from one room to another, and all the reporters are yelling and screaming at him, that this is almost where Oswald is finding out about information from the reporters yelling it to him. Because he comes out one time and says, I'm being arrested for, I didn't shoot anybody. I've been arrested for shooting an officer. And before that, he's like, he has no idea why he's there. And then you get up to the famous line of, I'm just a patsy. You can see his agitation start to grow. He did try to make a phone call. It was not allowed to go through. And the phone call he made was to someone very high up in a group that he is said to have been in, that was working on, it's like a decoy kind of, where you're just pretending to be a defector so you can really be a spy. They call it a lot of fancy things, but basically that's what it boils down to. And again, I'll have more information on the line down the line on that, but that's who he wanted to call. Like, Jude, I'm in trouble. You know, you guys said if I did this or if I ever got in trouble, kind of acting that way, you'd get me out of it. And he seems like he almost expected to meet somebody at that theater. You'll hear more later on down the line of his actions and what really is proven there. But what did this guy say? They found what when they arrested him? A wallet with his ID. 2 IDs, in fact. One was Oswald and one was Alec Heidel. Alec Heidel was one of the known aliases he used, especially in New Orleans when he was working for several different things down there, one of them being the Cuban resistance and other things. He was pretending to be a Marxist. He was pretending to be, he's handing out leaflets for that. And he's doing, hanging over here with Ferry and Clay Shaw, and working on fast-acting cancer with Judith Ferry Baker and these other scientist group, all in this same weird building where there's so many things going in and out and going on there. So back to that later. Here they find a wallet on him. Well, oddly enough, they also find a wallet where Tippit was shot, another Oswald wallet. And another one was found back at Ruth Payne's house where Oswald was staying with Marina and their 2 children. How many wallets do you have? How many wallets do you carry on you? This story is so bonkers. It's hard to hold on. But hang on, there's more. I'll try not to I'll try to shut up, but this thing just gets me going. But interesting.
Oswald, did you shoot the president? I didn't shoot anybody, sir. I haven't been told what I'm here for. Do you have a lawyer? No, sir, I don't.
The gun was fired one time by the suspect, but luckily it misfired. Fought with us like a wild man. And
is there any doubt in your mind, Chief, that Oswald is the man who killed the president?
I think this is the man that killed the president.
From the moment of his arrest, Oswald was presumed guilty. and portrayed to the world as a lone nut assassin. But he vehemently protested his innocence at every opportunity.
Nobody said what? Sir? You have. Nobody said what? Okay, man. Okay.
Visibly shaken by this news, Oswald was to be interrogated for a further 36 hours
A policeman hit me.
before his transfer to the county jail.
You regard the county jail as a more secure place to house the prisoner. Is that why you're transferring him from the city jail?
It's customary after a man is filed on that he be transferred. We only keep him in our jail until he is filed on. Necessary precautions will be taken, of course, but I don't think that the people will try to take the prisoner away from us.
On the Sunday morning, Oswald was escorted through the basement of police headquarters by detectives Jim Lavelle and L.C. Graves.
Jim Lavelle and myself and Oswald stepped off the elevator, walked a few steps, and waited till we got the all clear signal to go on out to where the car was supposed to be parked waiting for us.
But the car was not in place. Consequently, when I walked out, I was looking to my right where the car was being backed into position, but it wasn't where it ought to be. I could see this crowd of people to my left, which include police officers and news reporters, cameramen, and so forth. I saw Ruby in this crowd to my left. He was standing on the front with a pistol in his hand down at his side.
I caught him out of the corner of my eye, and then I started, of course, getting loose from Oswald where I could grab the gun. But before I could grab the gun, he had already gotten one shot off, so I grabbed his wrist and the gun simultaneously and just spun around with him.
There's the person. There is Leon. He's been shot.
Shot rang out. Mass confusion.
I not got that gun. He may, in the excitement, shot off some more rounds because he was still squeezing on that trigger in an attempt to shoot that pistol again. I think Oswald really died just a short distance from the hospital because he stretched out every muscle in him tight, and he just said, and then went totally limp. And as far as I know, he didn't make any move or sound after that.
Mr. Oswald died at 1:07 our time in the operating room of the gunshot wound which he had received.
By the Monday evening, both Oswald and Kennedy had been buried, and the inquests begun. All investigations focused on the lone gunman theory, and within 2 weeks, a detailed FBI report declared the guilt of Lee Harvey Oswald. Secret Service reenactments supported their conclusions. In March the following year, sentence was passed on Jack Ruby.
We, the jury, find the defendant guilty of murder with malice as charged in the indictment and assess his punishment at death.
Meanwhile, the Warren Commission, charged by President Johnson to find the truth, operated almost entirely in secret. Based in Washington, the commissioners finally came to Dallas.
Okay, I have to chime in. So you've got Jack Ruby, an interesting character. He gets his whole episode, his own episode, and we'll talk more about him later on. But when asked, Jack Ruby kind of leaned in and said that he didn't want Jackie Kennedy to have to go through a trial. And you can hear R.F. Kennedy Jr. just recently tell the story of when, you know, they hear his family talked about that, and it was confusing for the kids because they actually heard that. And, you know, did he love our family? Was his question. Is he do it because he loved our family? You know, it's so sad how this pebble rippled out on this. Some people say it was a lake of Camelot, you know, with all this, you know, everything was wonderful. It wasn't. I mean, it was half and half. It was kind of like, you know, it was about 4 years ago in our lives. It felt like half and half. And the people that hated him, of course, like I said earlier, were the people that it was going to affect his There were people that wanted to start war with Cuba. There was people that wanted to start war. It was just the same. You know, you always have your warmongers and your people that want to make money on that war. And the common man, most people loved him. And he was really trying to help, you know, civil rights. And there was so much going on. And in the midst of this, you've got this deep, dark, deep state black fog rolling through the whole thing. So Ruby's tied up in this mess. He's mixed up with organized crime. He's mixed up with the cops. He's mixed up with, and you know, a lot of bad cops too in Dallas. And he's mixed up with prostitutes. And he's running a place called the Carousel Club where you've got strippers. It was like a vaudeville-ish kind of place where you had comedians and you had dancers and you had singers and you had bands and you had all kind of other stuff. And he was at everything from, you hear, from a money runner to a gopher kind of guy. He wanted to please both sides of organized crime and the cops and everything in between. Like I said, more on him later, but the big thing about what you just saw is there's a lot of controversy on how did he get in. Now, I had heard a lot about this, but I think I met Jack Ruby even more and got to know him a little bit more when I talked to Mark Shaw, because Mark Shaw went through the Dorothy Kilgallen door in the hallway of Kennedy. And Dorothy Kilgallen was sitting in this courtroom that you just saw. And she was a journalist. We know quite a bit about Dorothy Kilgallen if you've watched this channel. But she was a prominent journalist of her time. She wrote a column. She was on What's My Line and all that kind of stuff. We've heard about Dorothy. Also died mysteriously, very much like Marilyn Monroe. Very similar. Also very good friends with John F. Kennedy. She had been to the White House. She'd brought her child there to see him. He was very cool to her little boy. She felt close to him. She'd been at dinner parties with him and talked about, they were interested in UFO and politics and everything. So she felt very close to this case. And she was in there and sat down at Ruby trial day one. She was all over it. And she's the only reporter that got to talk to Jack Ruby. And when she finished talking to Jack Ruby, she confessed some things to her close to her hairdresser, was a very close friend of hers, and more of a than a hairdresser, was a very good friend and someone who helped her get dressed and for certain for What's My Line and anything that she had to perform at or be at. And when she got done talking to Jack Ruby, she went right to New Orleans. Went to talk to Carlos Marcello and that group out there. So that's why Mark goes that direction. And what else does that lead you to? Jim Garrison, the Attorney General, who was also digging into the JFK case and was tying in Clay Shaw and Ferry and all these people that were working on this different ways to kill Castro and enemies of who they consider to be enemies. And they were working on a very fast-acting cancer. This is widely throughout all the JFK stuff. And again, it's also in the movie JFK that Oliver Stone did. Now, there's a lot of controversy about Judith Ferry Baker and did she really have an affair with Oswald? Again, I don't really care about all that. There's no doubt he was there. There's no doubt he was mixed in it. And that's the whole case with Jim Garrison and what JFK, the movie, is based around, because he felt like they were in on the conspiracy to kill John F. Kennedy, but he only had a piece of it. So he couldn't connect all the threads. The threads weren't making a picture for him. He was doing squares of the quilt. That's my theory anyway. Very good, fantastic, and pulled up so many things from the JFK stuff, but it's only one part. But that's where Dorothy Kilgallen went. And listening to Mark Shaw describe everything that Ruby did that day, from was he really at the Western Union sending money to one of his dancers, Was he really out getting dancers when he went out, new dancers for his club when he went out to New Orleans and met with Marcello and some of the other mob heads out there? Did he really get all of a sudden wind up with $50,000? I think the day before this happened, that he put in his safe. Was he at the police station or the press or the what do you call it? The newspaper, looking out the window at exactly 12:30 when JFK was shot? Like he knew it was going to happen. So all of these things, again, are painting a picture. But how did he get in here? Well, Mark Shaw dug up about a conversation he was having with one of the police officers that came into where he was filling out, I think, a request to put in an ad for the club or something like that. So he's at the newspaper to pay for this classified ad or something. And the cop came in and they were talking about the president coming through and all that stuff. And he's looking out the window. He ought to get a good view here, you know, that kind of thing. There was a conversation heard by somebody in that room he was having with an unknown person. And he was saying stuff like, yeah, I'm going to make like a reporter and I'm, you know, I got a pad and a pencil and I'm, you know, I'm going to do it that way. And little things like that. You put it all together. It seems like Jack Ruby was a little bit more than just someone who wanted to do this so Jackie Kennedy wouldn't have to go through a trial and caught up in the emotion of the moment. So I don't know how you consider all of that looking into this. Again, we'll talk more about him down the line. I've got a lot of different people that I'd kind of steer you to if you wanted to dig more into it. And of course, I can't recommend the website Kennedy's and King, and that is James DiEugenio's website. He's a fantastic researcher, and he was the one that did all the writing for the screenplay for JFK Through the Looking Glass and JFK Revisited. So that's the most recent stuff. I highly recommend both of them. And he's also given a lot of interviews after the new JFK files came out. A lot of stuff about documents that matched what we have been thinking for decades about the girls on the stairs and how Oswald could have not got down from the 6th floor and been in that 2nd floor snack room. And he's got witnesses. That's three women that witnessed this. And then you've got the 2 people that come in. One was a cop. They come in and they see Oswald there. And the manager said he works here. And in an interview, you hear him say, that's how he got away because he worked there. So we let him go. Well, if you hear their description of him, he wasn't upset. He's standing there drinking a Coke. He doesn't look like he just ran down 6 flights of stairs and shot somebody, you know, and had time to hide this. The whole thing is just ludicrous. And the fact that they were able to pull it off can only be explained by the fact that communication back then was horrendous. You had the evening news, you had the morning paper, you had the evening paper, and you had a lot of talk around the water cooler and people, you know, passing rumors and their thoughts. I lived a little bit like that through Watergate, and it was even worse in 63 because you only got what you were fed. It's not like now where we can talk about it and decide for ourselves with the facts, you know. All right, here we go. Let's finish this up. We're almost done with this segment. Yes, and Lisa said that this is very like this. We've already seen about 2 hours of this, but there's more. So I will be using this throughout this series. So you will wind up seeing this whole thing. Now, if you want to watch it on your own, please do, because I'm telling you, you can't see it enough. You always pick something new out every time you see it.
A spokesman was former CIA Director Alan Dulles.
Are you convinced that he was shot from the school book depository?
Well, I think we better leave all that, you know, the evidence report will cover all of that, and we'll get into that. But that question might lead to a lot more. And
Earl Warren, Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, also came, with Commissioner Gerald Ford, a future president. The prime purpose of their visit was to interview Jack Ruby, who had appealed against his sentence. A frightened man, he claimed he could not talk freely in Dallas and begged 8 times to be taken to Washington to testify. The commissioners left, ignoring his pleas.
Everything pertaining to what's happening has never come to the surface. The world will never know the true facts of what occurred, my motives. The people that had so much to gain and had such a material motive to put me in a position I'm in will never let the true facts come above board to the world.
Now, these people are in very high positions, Jack?
Yes.
The Warren report concluded that Lee Harvey Oswald, acting alone, killed President Kennedy. Incarcerated in his cell overlooking Dealey Plaza for another 2.5 years, Jack Ruby suddenly contracted cancer and died at Parkland Hospital. With his silence permanently guaranteed, Ruby's body was flown to Chicago, the place of his birth, for burial. Only now, a quarter of a century after the president's death in Dallas, is the appalling truth behind his assassination and its cover-up revealed. Secretary Marilyn Sitzman, on the morning of the assassination, joined her boss, Abraham Zapruder, an enthusiastic home movie maker, on the grassy knoll. His film of the passing motorcade was to become the most detailed and gruesome record of the president's death.
We were looking around to see where would be a good place to be. And he looked here and he said, well, this standing up here would be a good shot. But he said, I got vertigo and I can't stand up there by myself. Would you stand behind me and hold on to me? I said, sure, why not? So he gets up here, I get up behind him, and I'm holding on to him. And he started filming about, just before they came around the corner. And we're filming, they come around the corner and start coming down, and they're, waving at everybody. And then we heard what to me sounded like 2 firecrackers. It was starting to get a little confusing because you could see things happening in the car, and you didn't quite get what was happening until they got right here in front of us in the third shot, hit Mr. Kennedy right in his head. We knew what happened.
This harrowing footage, after examination by the FBI, was immediately purchased by the publishers Time Life and locked away from public scrutiny. Were it not for photo analyst Robert Groden, who gained access to the original and worked on it secretly, its real significance may have remained hidden forever.
We had been told that the president had been shot from behind, from the Texas School Book Depository. If that had happened, he would have been thrown forward, the transfer of momentum of the bullet striking him in the rear of the head. But what we saw was the exact opposite. When he was struck, he was thrown to the rear and to the left, indicating a shot from the grassy knoll. The knowledge that we had been lied to scared me. I felt if anybody knew what I knew, that I'd be in a great deal of danger. So I didn't tell anybody. I quietly worked on the film for years. The more evidence that I was able to develop in the film, for instance, the timing of the shots, when the first shot was fired, which was a lot earlier than the Warren Commission had told us, at a point when Oswald, had he been up in that window, could not have fired the shot, until the most frightening, horrifying physical aspects, the nature of the wounds to the president's head, which are visible in some frames after the headshot, much clearer than anything the public has ever been allowed to see. Living with that became a horror, trying to keep that, afraid of being discovered that I knew that. That's what frightened me the most.
The Warren Commission ignored the film evidence of a shot from the front. They were also selective in their choice of eyewitness testimony. 2 members of the Willis family told them of hearing shots fired from behind the president's car. However, other vital evidence they tried to offer went unrecorded.
The implication was persuading, yes, ma'am, because all they wanted to know was 3 shots that probably came from the depository building, which I never have doubted. That's about all they wanted. That about all got into the Warren Commission, really, that I heard 3 loud shots from a Texas depository.
The headshot seemed to come from the right front. It seemed to strike him here, and his head went back, and all of the brain matter went out the back of the head. It was like a red halo, a red circle with bright matter in the middle of it. It just went like that. It was a terrible time. You cannot imagine seeing this. You knew it happened, but you didn't want to believe it.
the particular headshot must have come from another direction besides behind him, because the back of his head blew off, and it doesn't make sense to be hit from the rear and still have your face intact. So he must have been hit from another position, possibly, in the front or over to the side. I really don't know where, but the back of his head blew off.
So I am very dead certain at least one shot, include the one that took the president's skull off, had to come from the right front. And I'll stand by that to my death over my mother's grave.
The doctors at Parkland Hospital who tended the president minutes after the assassination also saw a head wound compatible with a shot from the front.
I could see that he had a large, about 7 centimeter opening in the right occipital-parietal area. A considerable portion of the brain was missing there, and the occipital cortex, the back portion of the brain, was lying down near the opening of the wound, and blood was trickling out.
Almost a fifth or perhaps even a quarter of the right back part of the head in this area here had been blasted out, along with probably most of the brain tissue in that area.
The president's body was flown in Air Force One directly from Dallas to Washington. Accompanied by Jackie Kennedy, the ornamental bronze casket was unloaded at Andrews Air Force Base, apparently to be driven straight to the Naval Medical Center at Bethesda for the official autopsy. It was here that Commanders Humes and Boswell, with Colonel Fink, were making their preparations for the autopsy of the century. Assisting them was medical technician Paul O'Connor.
The morgue door burst open and 6 or 7 men came carrying this casket in and set it on the floor next to the table, autopsy table. As I remember, this casket was a type of casket that was a cheap shipping type of casket. What I mean by shipping casket is that it's not a very ornamental casket. It's not very expensive.
It's two different kinds.
Casket.
This is not the casket in which Al Reich placed the president's body at Parkland Hospital, Dallas.
It was a expensive bronze-colored type. It was a bronze casket. One of the most expensive that we had in stock. It was a white satin lining inside the casket. We wrapped him in one of the sheets and just placed him in the casket that way.
The casket was opened, and inside was a slate gray rubber body bag with a zipper that ran from the head all the way down to the toes. It's the kind of body bag that you find people that were carried out of a disaster in. We unzipped the body bag, and inside was the body of the president. We put the body on the table. He was nude, no clothes on, but he had a white sheet, bloody white sheet wrapped around his face and his head.
So between Parkland Hospital in Dallas and the autopsy in Washington, the president's body had mysteriously been placed in another casket and also wrapped differently. Since the autopsy, there's also been a major discrepancy in the description of the president's fatal head wound.
It would be a jagged wound that involved the half of the right side of the back of the head. My initial impression was that it probably was an exit wound. So it was a very large wound.
This is not what the official autopsy photographs show. Hidden away for a quarter of a century and shown here for the first time, they reveal the back of the head intact.
The autopsy photographs show a massive wound, but it's in the right temporal area and into the parietal area, which is behind it, between the two. It is inconceivable to me that every single one of the witnesses who saw the president's head could be wrong, and specifically wrong, about this particular wound. They describe an avulsed, exploded open wound in the rear of the head. In the autopsy photographs, you see a small, neat wound of entrance. It's obvious to me that those photographs have been faked.
When I first saw the pictures of the president's body, so-called wounds. What really struck me was especially the head wound. They showed a nice little neat round bullet hole in the back of his head. Well, actually what I saw was the whole side of his head blown off. It was gone. I don't know where those things came from, but they're totally wrong. Every one of them.
In 1964, the Warren Commission dealt with this evidence by not looking at it. It was made available to them. They felt if they looked at it, they would have to deal with it and publish it. So they didn't deal with it. In 1977, around that time frame, the House Assassinations Committee had the photographs. What they did with it was even less excusable. They had the photographs, they had the questions that were brought to them about the photographs, and they did not allow the Dallas doctors, the most important witnesses in this particular area of the evidence, to even view them. And the reason seems quite clear. If they have the best eyewitnesses looking at the photographs saying that's not the condition of the president's head, then you not only have a conspiracy to kill the president, but absolute proof of the conspiracy to cover it up after the fact, because the only people who had the photographs were the government. If somebody faked those photographs, it was someone within the government, someone who had access to those photographs.
Well, there you have it. Now I'm going to stop it there because as Lisa and I were saying in the chat, this is a wonderful series that played out over months, I would imagine, back when it was brand new. And it's very good to use as a baseline and then go back and forth and go, okay, with the new documents and the new JFK files, is there anything in that that validates anything that they're saying in this decades ago? And if not, maybe it disproves it. Maybe it throws it out, or at least makes you question it a little deeper. Everything that this young man just said about the people describing the head wound, and I hate to go over it and over it because, again, this was a human being. This was our president. Regardless what you thought of him, it's horrible. Over decades, we've become so jaded that that somebody can say back and to the left, and you know what they're talking about. That's how bad it is. And I don't like looking at these pictures or showing them. But this is the time. This is the time that we need to get the truth out. And that's important. So important. And it also proves just that piece, just that thread of this tapestry proves conspiracy. And everything that has come out recently so far from the people that I'm sticking to, that's researching, and the things that I've seen, don't dispute that. It echoes it and enhances it. The information you just saw. Now, the two coffins, the Tippit murder, the things going down in the theater that you saw here on this particular film, the way it was described, there's more, a lot more. There's a lot more on Oswald, the imposters, or other Oswald as they're called. There's more on Ruby. There's more on everyone. And there were so many people involved in this, whether they knew it or not, at the same time. And I heard a very smart police officer with a lot of experience in special squads and just a really good perspective on this. And he had been looking at it for decades. And I liked a lot of the things he said. And he said some things I hadn't heard, and heard some things, back and forth in another vantage point. And he's probably one of the only other people that kind of said his theory that matched so close to I would have to say, if I had to pick one where I'm sitting, is that I honestly believe there were several groups that day that weren't even aware that there were other groups there, totally independent of each other, but somewhere connected, or was allowed to happen, or even the thought of what's one more, it'll cause chaos and confusion. let them cook. You know what I mean? Because there were so many bullets and so many indisputable things that happened, so many witnesses. This is one of them, the headshot. And as gross as it is, it's definitely prime evidence that there was a conspiracy. Because now, up to this point, in JFK Revisited, Jim DiEugenio's work, along with others, and Oliver Stone directing, they have up to 42 witnesses that day. And later, the ones that could, backing up what they said earlier, never questioned, never taken down by the Warren Commission, the Warren Report, or the investigation by the Dallas Police, whoever. Nobody even talked to them. That they're talking now, or did, 42, all went like this. Right here. The back of his head. That would have had to come from the grassy knoll or in front of the limo. And we do have theories that go with that. Jim Mars being one of them, bringing up the sewer. When that came out, when Crossfire came out, and Jim Mars put in that book that he thought one of the shooters could have been in a sewer. Now, this was a big man size. You could do the ladder, you can go up and down in it, and a man could have sat in it and had a direct shot right into the front of that limousine, because it was a bullet hole in that windshield of that limo. That was one of the first things they got rid of. They sent that doggone limo straight from Parkland right to the manufacturer and had that glass taken out. That limo was cleaned faster than the roof in Butler, PA, after they shot that kid that we still know nothing about. Just recently. They can get in your phone. They can tell you everything you've looked up, every coupon you've used, everything you bought off Amazon, and where you've been, I don't know how far back, and predict what you're probably doing in the future and send you a coupon for it, all on your phone. But they don't know what's on that kid's phone. Outsmarted by our entire, every service, the FBI, the CIA, the local police departments, you name it, all outsmarted by this 20-year-old kid with greasy hair and apparently a family that doesn't talk at all. One thing I've heard that kid's father say when the news got to him, it was right after the shooting in Butler. They asked him, I don't know if you saw it, maybe you did, but they asked him, and he's walking through the parking lot with a whole shopping cart full of groceries, and somebody walking with him. I don't know whether it was the kid's sister or the mother. I don't know who it was. She didn't say a word. Her face was covered up in a hoodie and glasses and a mask, for Pete's sake. And they asked this guy, and he turned around. You know what he said? I have to pee. And the reporter said, do you have anything to say, to the families of the people that were shot at Butler? And, do you have any idea why your son would do this? And he turned around and said, I have to pee. And that's the only thing I've ever heard him say. Isn't that odd? We can do all this digging and find out everything about everybody, but we can't find anything out about them and this kid who outsmarted a local police department, a sheriff department, the FBI, the Secret Service. All because of a slanted roof. I see a parallel, ladies and gentlemen. I see a parallel, but who am I? I'm nobody. Maybe you see it too. Maybe you think I'm batshit crazy. I'll tell you what, it's weird. All right, what do we got next? We're almost out of here. I wanted to finish up with this. So, we got to go back to the 6th floor. And we got to go back to who had the power to pull it off, who benefited from it. Right? So that takes us right back to good old LBJ, right? Okay, so really quick, going to share this with you, and then I'm going to check the chat real quick. Oh, no. Wrong button, Cisco. Wrong button. Bear with me. I can do it. Okay, here we go. Yep, that is an excellent series, The Men Who Killed Kennedy, and we'll be seeing more of that probably next week. I'm hopefully Steve Stockton will be back with us next Monday. I'm hoping. And I talked to him today. He's doing well. They're still unpacking and putting his computer together and getting all settled in. So Holden is doing great, and so is Mom is doing great too, Nick. So we send our love if you're listening. All right. We talked about all the people that got wiped out. So again, if there was no conspiracy, if there was no reason to keep a secret, why did all these people get whacked? We talked about Richard Belzer and the book and a lot of the interviews he's done on a book he wrote, Hit List. And we talked about Executive Decision, the 1975 movie that did a pretty good job of telling one part of the story, a couple of threads, in my opinion. And at the end of that, they rolled off all the people that had been lost just since 1975. The one guy that was killed with the karate chop, that poor man that was killed, we talked about last week, that had shot himself in the head 5 times with a bolt action rifle. This is actually fact, people. This stuff is mind blowing. We talked about the fingerprint that was found, the one fingerprint that was found on the 6th floor on a box. Now that came out in the documents recently as well, unredacted. More about this fingerprint. And here it is here. This is a quick one, I think. Was this it? Oh. Okay. That it was Mac Wallace's fingerprint. Okay. This is him here. Yeah, this is him, Malcolm E. Mac Wallace, and he actually got off. He was convicted of murder. Again, supposedly sent by LBJ. This was LBJ's hitman, and he basically got away with murder with a little help from his friends. Let me stop that one and go get you this one. All right. I wanted to get you what Bobby said. And here is what the brother of JFK said. RFK. And this has got to be so hard for RFK Jr. To have all this brought back up again, but so many people affected by this, All right, here we go. This is short.
There's a photograph that I published in Texas in the Morning, and the White House photographer told, you can see that Lyndon lost composure at the time. Bobby hits a post, and he has something in his hand, and Lyndon is real shocked. And the photographer said that Robert Kennedy said to him, "Why did you have my brother killed?"
Our president was as a gentleman and a human being. This man is not.
Yeah.
He's mean, bitter, vicious animal in many ways. I think he's got this other side of him in his relationship with human beings, which make it very difficult unless you want to kiss his behind all the time. He's able to eat people up.
But I understand that, he sends all kinds of reports over to you about me and about the Department of Justice.
Not any that I've seen.
Well, I just understand that he's about to be planning and plotting things.
But he hadn't sent me any report on you or on the department. Anytime.
Well, I had understood that he had sent reports over about me.
No.
The overthrow of the government by force and violence.
No.
Leading a coup.
No, That's an error. He never has said that or indicated or given any indication of it.
As I say, we'll all get through.
Okay. Yeah. I'll talk to you in a day or two. Bye.
He did have a back channel. He read them, I think, to make him feel a little more comfortable with what he thought were his enemies. Have a little more information on his enemies. They would be hand carried to a male assistant, and the president would read them in the presence of that man and hand them back to that man.
This is the day that Johnson was going to get his revenge. Johnson didn't particularly like Jack Kennedy. He hated Bobby Kennedy. J. Edgar Hoover has told me that, chap.
Well, there it is. Hated him. So, you know, if you take out the president, you pretty much neuter the AG, right? But if you take out the AG, you got the president to deal with. Something to think about. One last little thing here. Got a little over, but I think this part's worth it. I want to introduce you, if you have not seen, and I highly recommend, and they're funny together, and they're just smart, and, you know, one of them's got military background, and Mark has got decades of studying the JFK trial. Now, I'm a little agitated at him, and he won't talk about Dorothy, and he doesn't want to hear about Meatloaf. But other than that, this man's got his stuff together, and I don't think there's anybody that I recommend more than to listening to him, and listening to him in interviews with Oliver Stone and James DiEugenio and people like that. You can learn so much about this because they're bouncing off each other, and they're both also knowledgeable and spent decades digging into books I'll never even touch, let alone read. The YouTube channel is called America's Untold Stories. It is run by Eric Hunley and Mark Groubert, and they play off each other very well. And it's a lot of fun. And plus, they have a locals channel. And on that, the free part, you can still get a hold of a lot of PDFs of rare books that Mark has collected on this subject. You have everything from Ruth Payne and her involvement with it, from rare books on JFK, Mark Lane's first edition and what was in that, Rush to Justice, and so many others. So all that's free, and I think there's a paid something too. I'm not really sure what it is and what's in there, but one of those, you know, for members only kind of thing. But there's still a lot of stuff for free, so I highly recommend it. And I want you to hear a little snippet from America's Untold Stories. Get over there and subscribe to him, because Mark's going to tell you a little bit about LBJ and how the beginning of this, you know, what was the beginning of it and what went down, and take you a little bit to about where we are now on our other show. And I think that'll be a nice tight, kind of wrap it all up in a bow for tonight. Does that sound good? All right. And then everybody, if you haven't seen the Lincoln on my YouTube, there is a playlist called Lincoln, and I promise you, not to joke, but it takes you all the way from pretty much his birth to his ghost. And there's Civil War stuff in there and political stuff in there. And Donnie Cho was on it with me, and we read multiple different books and came together and gave our thoughts and really dug up a lot of stuff. And it was quite interesting. It's well worth the watch, I think. I think it's 5, maybe 6 episodes, 2 hours a piece. So there's quite a lot of information in there. And, you know, just like Lizzie Borden, I did Lizzie Borden like that. And just like, once I do it, it's like, I'm done. And I absolutely love Lincoln. And there's a lot of controversy on that too. And I know about the dark spots, and I still admire the man. I really do. And I admire Kennedy too. And I don't think he should have been taken out at age 43 at 12:30 in the afternoon in front of everybody. And I think they tried to do it again. And I think it's the same factions involved. And I think this is a perfect time to bring all this out. No, I'm not the only one that feels this way. You may feel this way too, you know, and if not now, maybe after we're done here. So without further ado, let's bring in the boys here from America's Untold Stories. And I think you're going to love Mark. You'll like Eric too, but Mark's a character. And there he is, LBJ with JFK, LBJ in his heyday. And there's Connolly and the Kennedys right before. And again, when you see the man,
It's going to be Lyndon Johnson. And
he
of
didn't
course,
deserve it.
I got heartsick. I've reached the conclusion it would be the best judgment of the convention to nominate Senator Lyndon B. Johnson of Texas for the office of Vice President. There also continues to be much debate about why Johnson, the Senate Majority Leader, would take the job, seemingly a demotion. Again, there are differing opinions. Lou Harris heard one explanation from Earl Clements, the Senate whip.
I'll tell you why Lyndon accepted this. Why? He said, well, Kennedy's got Addison's disease. He's going to die in office. Lyndon knows a Southerner will never get elected president. The only way he's ever going to get elected is if Kennedy dies. If he dies, Lyndon's the president.
We got to focus on the lead up to the story. And what Eric has shown you is the lead up to the story. You know, the 60 nomination of LBJ as vice president begins in a lot of people's minds the actual conspiracy to take down JFK. And in that incredible night right here at the Biltmore Hotel in Los Angeles in 1960, the nomination of JFK leads to the need to select a vice president, Eric. And in there lies the seeds to the assassination.
Are we going to go back a little bit to say this time here?
Well, we can go back a little bit in time to Bobby Baker, and we could go back and do Billy Saul Estes to lead up to where that nomination footage you were talking about, just to give the backstory to the nomination.
Okay, we don't want to go into his benefactor.
All right, well, we'll go even that far back. 1937, this is FDR on the left. That's a 1937 newly minted congressman named Lyndon Baines Johnson out of Texas. This is, he becomes part of the FDR paternal organization of Democrats in the country, liberal Democrats. He's not a liberal, he's a pragmatic psychopath, but nevertheless, LBJ needs people in Texas, and Johnson has two friends that become Brown and Root, the Brown brothers, and they begin to get federal money out of FDR to build a dam in Texas. And that is the beginning of the corruption of federal money that is siphoned off by LBJ for his friends, Brown and Root, that later becomes Halliburton, and all his defense contracts in Texas,
Halliburton,
including Bell Helicopter, which will end up
Bell
in
Health.
Vietnam. But this is the handshake. This is the first meeting of LBJ and FDR, and FDR becomes his political daddy.
And it's
a good daddy.
Daddy to have too.
Big
It's
daddy.
a good daddy.
It's a big daddy.
Because he was around till what, 1945, so
Right,
he
so
helped establish LBJ.
Oh, without a doubt. I mean, the money flowed from FDR through a guy named Tommy Cochran, who was his money guy, and that went to Texas to LBJ's patronage winners, who that's why he elected him, was to get that money and bring it back to Texas.
Yep.
Okay, and these same benefactors were not direct, but it was partly because of them that all this went down, right?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, you're talking about
As a professional,
Sid Richardson and Clint Murchison and H.L. Hunt
Murchison.
and D.H. Byrd. These are the four big oil guys who are getting a 27%
Big oil.
Oil depletion allowance through the federal government. In other words, a chop of nearly 30% off their. This is D.H. Byrd right here.
30%.
We'll get into him in a later episode with Oswald, but that dry hole Bird, his name was D.H. Byrd, but they called him Dry Hole Bird because he dug thousands of wells in Texas to no avail. He was one of the least successful of the oil guys, but still a multimillionaire, along with H.L. Hunt and Murchison and Richardson. But they were the benefactors of, to answer your question, they were the benefactors of LBJ. They did not like necessarily the elimination of the depletion oil allowance, which was a big threat to them economically. And LBJ was the one who was going to keep it in place if he could. through the 60s, But to go back to how we got here, he works his way up from a congressman to senator in the 1948 election. He steals that.
Steals it.
Against
So
Phelps
bad.
Stevenson. That went to the Supreme Court. That was Box 13, where they found him the winner in the landslide by 87 votes.
Listen
and
close.
The technique had been done to him. He was not the originator of this technique of waiting overnight till your opponent declared he was done counting, Eric, if this sounds vaguely familiar.
No.
And the next morning, after you have
Sound
the
familiar?
final count of your opponent, you then go find the amount of votes
Just
needed
saying.
to trump your opponent. And that was done to LBJ in his first try. And
Same
he vowed,
playbook.
along with a guy named John Connolly, who was his
Same
campaign
playbook.
manager and would be his co-conspirator in many ventures for the rest of his life. John Connolly later became Secretary of the Navy, became governor of Texas. He became he switches parties and actually gets nominated by Nixon to be the Secretary of the Treasury years later, and then runs for president in 1980, trying to be the next LBJ.
Weren't they doing something else called running the Mexicans or voting the Mexicans or something like that?
Running the Mexicans was a term that political leaders in regions were trained to do the best at. This guy, George Parr, in Alice, Texas, down there in Duval, he was the best at quote unquote, running the Mexicans. In other words, getting them either physically to vote or by proxy to vote for the candidate of their choice. In fact, he got, I think he got like 97% of the Mexican vote down there, or some insane amount. And LBJ was laughing that they lost some guys. All of these were illegal ballots, ballot stuffing, and it's really about, which became a signature of the Democratic Party, about waiting till your opposition is done counting. That's the game. When they're finally done, then that's why these urban centers today, which is a much bigger national situation, these urban centers say, we will not be done by 9 p.m. We will be going overnight. That's the fix. That goes back to 1948 in a small town in Texas.
I was thinking, what about Dewey defeats Truman? And that famous headline.
That was not the same thing, but
okay.
It could have had those echoes of it. You know what I mean? They could have had those echoes of it.
I was going to say, yeah, they might have thought, okay, well, they're done counting. Oh, well.
When you see a race where it goes to the next morning and they dig out just enough to win because they give them a little buffer just so it doesn't look, like 3 votes. They make it like 1,050, whatever they do, they buffer it. That's the signature of the Democratic Party, the urban vote.
1948.
And the way to really end that is to just say, this is it. You got till 9 o'clock to get in your votes. No more freaking counting. That's it. Whatever you got on the board, that'll end it in one act of how to prevent this, because they're not going to go away from doing this. It's worked too successfully for 100 years.
Yeah, yeah. Allegedly.
Anyway, that's what LBJ allegedly did to become the senator from the state of Texas. And
Box
then
13. Remember that. Box 13.
He's minority leader under a portion of the time. Then he becomes a majority leader when the Democrats take the Senate. And at that point, he becomes the most powerful man in America, the most powerful Democrat in America, because Eisenhower is playing golf quite a bit, and Nixon's kind of running Eisenhower's operation. But Johnson has the ability to stop any legislation from being passed because they have a majority in the Senate, Eric. So what he does is he literally makes himself the most powerful man in America. As the speaker, as the Senate majority leader, he was not Speaker of the House, but he is able to bottle up and do anything he wants in terms of power. And he becomes a student of a guy named Groubert, who was a rancher, who was a congressman. That's how he got started before he was a congressman. He was an intern and then ran the office for this guy Groubert out of Texas, who was a rancher and a millionaire. And that he learned all the rules. The brilliance of Johnson is he never read a book after college, never read a book in his life, and he cheated in college. He also cheated on his college election as president. He bought votes in a college election.
He learned young.
You know how far back this goes. But
it's amazing.
Nevertheless, he never had a book, but he had an intuitive knowledge as a psychopath and as a megalomaniac and bipolar, sex addict, alcoholic. I guess it comes with certain powers, certain additional powers of reading people and understanding weaknesses of people. And that was his super strength, was able to.
And sucking up to old men.
That was the other thing. That's what he did with FDR. And he was a genius at brown-nosing older, powerful men and becoming a supplicant to find out, not only so they can help him, but to find out what they knew about life, what they knew about politics, and to get as much information out of them as humanly possible, while being the biggest brown-noser ever created in the world.
Yeah,
see why I'm letting Mark tell you?
Up, and then everybody under him he would treat like complete, utter garbage.
He was absolutely brutal to people. Just a bully, just an absolute goddamn bully who was a psycho.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
You were telling me about that earlier, actually, that one way you could tell his people is that when they were acting on his behalf,
this
they
is
acted
very
like
interesting.
him, but the rest of the time they might have been normal.
Right. It was almost a dead giveaway. They when he wanted, usually this is with illegal things. This is with corruption. He didn't need them to do his work on legal stuff. He could pick up the phone and do that himself. When he wanted to distance himself from the crime itself, he would have his lackeys like Connolly and obviously there's Bobby Baker and Cliff Carter and Bill Moyers and a little bit Goodwin near the end, although Goodwin only lasted a couple of years. And Walter Jenkins, the closeted gay guy who was his chief of staff, roughly. There's a bunch of these guys. And he abused the shit out of them. And when he wanted them, or wanted himself to run an illegal operation out of Texas, or nationally when he became president, he would have them do his bidding to have some distance. And inexplicably, they would act like him, which almost makes it a dead giveaway because they didn't act like that normally. Like Bill Moyers was an evangelical Christian, but he would act like LBJ screaming and yelling because it was done to him. It's almost like the Stockholm syndrome or something, or they're passing on the mistreatment, Eric, to the
Wasn't
next.
Bill Moyers hired to be a quote chaperone because he was
They're all chaperones. They were all chaperones, and a lot of them were gay, and he would use them to chaperone his different women around because they were safe. You know what I mean? They were considered safe. Jack Valenti was one of them, allegedly a closeted gay guy, and the FBI did an investigation. And thank you, Knuckleface. Great hat, by the way. I got to get one of those hats. Wow, maybe the $20 we got a hat. But anyway, so Moyers was brought on board because he came out of an evangelical college, and they were hoping that he would add some sort of puritanical bent as his press secretary, and later these people's jobs changed all the time. Like Moyers was a press secretary briefly, but mostly they were just part of his lackey bunch of stooges who were very short men, and they looked like the Seven Dwarfs, like that photo we showed last week when they were all in the office. They all look like they're 5'4", 5'5". And that wasn't inaccurate. These were men that he literally browbeat into submission. And they had their own separate things, what they were doing. But to get back to Bobby Baker, which is where we were going with this thing, Bobby Baker is the Secretary of the Senate. That's a position, an unelected position, who handles, there he is, there's Bobby Baker. He was called Little Lyndon. He named his kids after Lyndon's daughters. He lived around the corner from
Remember
Lyndon
this
Johnson.
name.
He was his right-hand bag man. Bobby Baker, as the Secretary of the Senate, was the guy who brokered the cash deals between the defense contractors and anybody, the mob, whoever it was, into converting it into cash and delivering it to LBJ. Bobby Baker, this is, of course, now known history, Bobby Baker's books, his memoir, his indictment. We now know how Bobby Baker was Little Lyndon. And Bobby Baker was being pressed. There's a little miniature shot of Minnie Lyndon, right? Yep. By the way, LBJ is wearing a girdle in that photo, and that's why he looks so svelte. He began, because of the abuse of alcohol too, and the gluttony of the food. I mean, it was just an insane. He was like King George, a mad King George who's gluttonous, drinking 2 quarts of Dewar's a night, taking out Jumbo and parading him around the White House, yelling the N-word at all the black staff, nonstop, all night. Anyway, make a long story short, Bobby Baker, that scandal's about to blow. He's on the front page of Time, and this was Life. Okay, this is the week before, oddly enough, the assassination, right? And Baker, he was on both, right? Oh, he was on both. Okay, I thought so. So this is the week before the assassination. Bobby Baker was running a strip motel outside of Baltimore, Maryland, a motel that was filled with escorts. And congressmen would come there and have sex with the escorts, and also a place in a building called the Quorum Club that was a pseudo nightclub in an apartment building in D.C. That was a separate one where the congressman went and he would arrange women to be there for them. Part of this, from LBJ's point of view, was to have blackmail dirt on every single guy who utilized the services of Bobby Baker with the motel and with the Quorum Club. That's what the operation was about. And they were closing in on Bobby Baker. And just to give you the backstory here, it's a complicated story. The guy who wants to take him out is the Department of Justice. And the head of the Department of Justice is Robert F. Kennedy, the Attorney General, who wants LBJ off the ticket. And their feud goes back to the Senator McCarthy days when Bobby Kennedy was a staffer for Senator McCarthy out of Wisconsin. And LBJ had called Joe Kennedy a Nazi lover. And Robert Kennedy, the pit bull of the Kennedy family, never forgot it and confronted Johnson about it at this breakfast in D.C. when he was sitting as a staff member with McCarthy. And he went at him and they taunted each other back and forth. And, Johnson said on numerous occasions, I will slit his throat if it's the last thing I do. He said this to everyone he knew. He gestured many times with the finger. And eventually, which we'll get into in a later episode, how he had RFK eliminated. The hatred between these two men has been reported in so many books, by so many aides, by so many people, is to be so vicious and so nasty because he couldn't intimidate Robert Kennedy. He couldn't buy Robert Kennedy because they had Kennedy money. He couldn't use patronage jobs on the Kennedys because they didn't need them. Kennedy saw through him. Kennedy saw that this was a guy who had no ideology,
So true.
was neither a liberal or a conservative, was obviously a bully, a drunk, a liar, a sex maniac. Kennedy saw all that. And Johnson knew that he saw all that. And they could not coexist in the same universe for much longer, Eric.
Yeah, well, there's been entire books written literally just on their relationship or lack thereof.
A lack thereof. We'll get into that in a later episode. But for right now, let it be said that RFK was determined not to allow what happened to happen.
This is so funny.
Getting back to the Biltmore
This is
Hotel
so good.
here in Los Angeles in 1960 at the convention,
Incredible.
what happens is these two men show up in the hotel room, and Evelyn Lincoln, who's JFK's secretary, is there, and Bobby Kennedy is not there. These two men come into the suite with an envelope, and they show JFK these photos of him with all these different women. Ellen Romsch.
Oh, that's right. Somebody else was picked as the VP candidate already.
That's right. Stuart Symington out of Missouri. She said it was going to be Terry Stanford, but that was for 1964. That's after he dropped him for the ticket. I'm talking about 1960.
Right.
And he had promised Stuart Symington, the senator of Missouri, completely officially, that he was going to be the vice president nomination.
The letter was written and everything. I think he had written a speech.
Right.
Is all.
Yeah, we
done.
could put a lot of this up on Locals because I have
But
a lot of this documentation.
Two guys with an
and people
envelope
can look at it themselves.
walk
We
into
don't
the
have
Oval
time to really
Office
footnote it as we speak, but we'll put a lot of it on Locals.
from
The point of the
Herbert
matter is,
Hoover.
he gets these two FBI agents visit him, and they show him the photos. And the demands are, they were going to get rid of Hoover too. And the demands are Hoover stays, LBJ gets the vice presidential nomination. JFK can't believe it, but he's trapped like a rat. And he calls up LBJ and he offers him, he's thinking, by the way, that as the master of the Senate, as the most powerful man in America, that LBJ in a billion years would never accept the job. JFK said, okay, I'll do it. I'll keep Hoover on and I'll call LBJ and offer him the position, knowing that LBJ would decline. Because who the hell wants to, it's a warm bucket of spit, as Nance had said years before,
And who was Hoover's neighbor again?
So good.
His neighbor
J.
was a guy
Edgerman.
who lived across the street named Lyndon Baines Johnson.
Oh.
So
They were neighbors.
so what can I say? He gets a phone call he calls him up and he says, I'm going to offer you the vice presidential slot, Lyndon, and I think you deserve it, and you're a good man, and blah, blah, blah. So Lyndon Johnson said, all right, let me get back to you, right? So he gets his Sam on the phone, he gets his wife, gets his crew, and he says famously to Bobby Baker, he says, I want you to find out how many presidents have died in office. That was in the Biltmore Hotel
Son of a
that
bitch.
night. And Bobby Baker says, why? And he says, just do what I fucking told you. And he sends Bobby Baker out and comes back that it's 7 presidents who died in office. And it's an average of every 17 years. And the last one to do it was 1945, which was FDR. This is 1960. And that's 15 years. And LBJ famously says, I'm a gambling man. I like them odds. And he calls him up and he accepts the position. And Robert Kennedy.
There he is.
This is at the Biltmore Hotel, right? Robert Kennedy goes batshit crazy. And he goes into the office, he goes into the suite with his brother, and he said, what's going on? And he tells him about the photos. And he also tells him that I never thought he would accept this. And Robert Kennedy cannot accept this because the hatred between the two men is so enormous that he just can't believe what his brother did. And his brother said, what am I supposed to do? I'm trapped like a rat here. I mean, we have no choice. So his brother begins to like assuage it, saying, well, he can deliver Texas, he can deliver some states. Bobby Kennedy could care less. And Kenny O'Donnell comes in. Kenny O'Donnell goes berserk. By the way, played by Kevin Costner in the movie the 13 Days, very well.
Yeah.
It
is too.
Anyway, so
good.
Kenny O'Donnell comes in. They all flip out, and they said, you rode into this town on a white horse. You can't throw the liberals under the bus. You can't throw the blacks under the bus. Every single group in this country hates Johnson's guts. Now, keep in mind, he has blocked his entire career.
All of it.
All civil rights legislation that has ever been put forth by the Democratic Party. This is the legacy of LBJ up until that time. I mean, picking him would be, I'm trying to understand the most, conservative, I guess it would be like Joe Manchin. It would be like picking Joe Manchin to be vice president instead of Harris. You know what I mean? If that makes any sense. So he's an uber liberal of JFK, and now they're trapped like a rat. So what does RFK do? He goes downstairs, he barges into the suite and says, I want you to pick up the phone and tell my freaking brother you're not going to accept it. And they're all there. Sam Rayburn there. They're all these guys.
Too
there.
much.
And Lyndon goes, oh, now come on, Bobby. Why would I want to do that? Why doesn't your brother tell me, Bobby? And he starts making believe he's crying. He would do this thing where he'd just start crying, LBJ, with real tears.
Too much,
And
man.
Kennedy is like looking at him going, what the hell's with the tears now? Because he was a real pragmatic guy, RFK. So he says, I can't do that. Your brother asked me to be the vice president. Now, come on, Bobby. Come on. And Kennedy, he just loses his mind. And of course, there's nothing he could do. And what's done is done, my friend. That's how we ended up with him getting the nomination to be the vice president of the United States. And that is the beginning of the coup d'etat.
Amen, brother.
Yeah, what
Now, after watching that, you know why I had Mark Groubert tell you. Again, thank you again, Chris, for finding that. That is America's Untold Stories. There's a link. I'd get over there if you like that style. I do. I think he's fun, highly knowledgeable, and nobody better to tell that story. So now you're caught up to where was LBJ in his mind when all this was going down. You've got a little bit of idea of his power, how he liked to throw it around, the type of person he was, how he treated people, how he climbed the ladder. Did he have the persona and the character to imagine being able to pull something like this off? Was he also involved in the other attempts in Miami, in Chicago? Or was that somebody else? Was he so prominent in Dallas because he was so prominent in Dallas? He had all these connections. Good friends with the owner of the school book depository, good friends with the governor of the state. Within hours, Hoover was on the phone with LBJ telling him, you have your man. It's all about Oswald. Oswald's acting like he doesn't know why he's being arrested. He changes every time you see him. He's a little more intense. He's making phone calls to somebody who runs a special squad that teaches people how to be decoy defectors. Oswald was a defector to Russia, came back with a Marina. Didn't go through all the regular channels when he came back. Odd. So many odd things around Oswald. Man carries 3 wallets. The gun he has came out of nowhere. No record of him buying it. Where did he get it? Who gave it to him? Did somebody give it to him? It had a bent firing pin. There's documents that say that when the police tried to fire it for ballistics, they had to fix the firing pin. This is why it didn't go off. Was it broken so it wouldn't go off? If so, who broke it? Why did 2 jackets were found, supposedly that belonged to Oswald? And the jacket can be traced to somebody else that may or may not have been a decoy, another Oswald. This thing is so deep. And it's like being in the swamp and trying to separate the creatures. But I think LBJ may have been one. According to Mark, he tells another story about a lot. He's got a lot of good stories on LBJ, and hopefully I'll be able to share some of those with you along the way on a lot of people. Again, some of his most interesting stuff is hearing him talk to other researchers and having them play off, especially the new stuff that's come out and a lot of the things that were reaffirmed, things they suspected. Not a lot disputing these major theories, the ones that really hold. Mark tells a story about at the end of LBJ's life, he pretty much became a recluse on his ranch. Same ranch that I've come to believe that if they had missed with all those people shooting at him, I can't imagine how, but if they had missed that day, at least on the LBJ side, he had invited the Kennedys to a barbecue right after the parade, motorcade, whatever. And it's heard tell, like the old folks back in Alabama said, heard tell that if JFK had made it out of Dealey Plaza, he wasn't going to make it out of that ranch, that barbecue that day. There was a backup plan. The thing that gets me a lot in this segment is what Jackie went through, regardless of how they were together or their private marriage, whatever. Doesn't matter to me. That woman went through a lot that day. And LBJ went out of his way to make it worse. That doesn't look good for him, to me. I don't know how you feel about that. The other things he did to step on people to get to where he wanted to be. People he had taken out by his hitman, by his henchmen, by the people that were scared of him, even after his death in Dallas. Hard tell. So there's some of it on LBJ. We heard it from Bobby, multiple other people. There's a lot more. We have a lot more to go through. This is very much, Lisa, like the Lincoln. Lincoln, we dug in, found out, here's a little spoiler alert. His mom was always a mystery on how she died. And we uncovered how she did. And it was pretty heartbreaking, and very compassionate too. Makes you understand the kind of bloodline he came from and the type of person she was, and his father too. So there's all that in there and more. So enjoy. Real quick before we leave, I wanted to tell you about Tuesday night at the movies. I have found a good one. I had forgotten all about it. And before we go, I wanted to play you a little bit of the trailer of what we're going to see Tuesday night. So please get over to Rumble, follow us over there, hit the like on your way out. And this closes off our part 2 of Tapestry. I hope you found some threads. I want you to think about this yourself. Don't believe me. This is just my research. The presence, I haven't been able to find a clear copy of that. I'm working on that. It's definitely on the list. That's a good one. But this is a surprise. I had forgot all about it. So here it is. It's a little flick that came out of the year 1981. Can you guess? Can you guess? Can you guess? Can I find it? Here we go. It's called, very simply, Ghost Story. I'd forgotten all. Anybody remember that one? Lisa, you remember that one? I'll tell you what, I remember getting the book in high school. And the last time I saw that was in a theater in 1981. So we'll have fun watching that one tomorrow night. Thank you for being here tonight for this. Please hit the like on the way out. Thank you for all your support. Thank you to Chris for your wonderful support, and everybody else who's ever supported just by sharing, by following, by joining us over on the Rumble and on Facebook too. And I thank you guys so much. Now, the movie is only for people over on Rumble. So if you're not signed up over there, come on over. It's free. We're not getting anything out of it but time together. Bring snacks, find a good seat, come early, and I hope you'll join us. And thank you all for being here tonight. I don't know. I think this is a pretty strong thread. We're getting little pieces of other ones. We got a little Ruby coming in. We've got all his connections. And man, guys, wait till you hear about the Secret Service and what they were up to that night. I mean, the amount of dastardly deeds, the things that you have to wonder, did this person know? Was this one in on it? Did this one know? What did they know? What did they think they were doing? We have to kind of keep reminding ourselves this is so compartmentalized that there were probably guys standing next to each other very closely that day on that, whether they were on the grass or on the curb, on the sidewalk, in the building, that knew about it, that were in on it, that were there to watch it, and didn't know each other. I really believe that to be true. And this is a lot deeper than just, throwing it off and saying this person did it and that they're the only person. I think there was a lot of people. There was a lot of gears to this machine, a lot of threads to the tapestry. Thank you for being here and helping me unravel it. On our way out, see you tomorrow night. Those that are joining us for the movie Ghost Story. It's a good one. Like I said, I hadn't seen it in a while, and I forget a lot of parts about it, so it'll be fun to see it again. Kick your shoes off, dance some of this blues away, but I want you to remember going out. What Kash Patel said, it's still going on. And I highly recommend, if you want something else that'll really get your gears going, that's a little more today, it's actually dropped today, and that is the Tucker Carlson is having a conversation about Building 7 and 9/11 and some other things that kind of prove that everything that went on 63 is still going, and it's got to be stopped. There you go. Get your shoes off. Let's dance the blues away. Good night, everybody.